Hello, I'm Howard Friedman. I'm the director of the Jewish Community Library in San Francisco, and I'm so glad to welcome all of you to this event with Alexa Morris and Ben Parket on the new book, The Courtyard, Ben's memoir, which they collaborated on. I want to thank the Friends of the Jewish Community Library who make all we do at the library possible. I hope you'll consider becoming a friend by giving at any level at friendsofthejcl.org. And tonight's program is made possible by Jane and Michael Rice. The library has a combination of in-person and online events. We have an in-person event coming up on Sunday, October 19th with Sabina Baral, whose memoir recounts being among the thousands of Jews expelled from communist Poland in 1968 during a campaign of state-sponsored anti-Semitism that is little remembered today. And we have an online event on Sunday, October 26th, with historian Hazia Diner of New York University and Bill Ong Hing of the University of San Francisco Law School, which is entitled Closing the Door, the 1924 Immigration Act and its Impact on Jewish and Asian Communities. You can learn about our events at jewishcommunitylibrary.org. Please note that automated closed captioning can be turned on or off by clicking the CC button that's at the bottom of your screen. And we'll all be muted, but you will have the opportunity to ask questions at the end via Zoom's chat function. So please do put your questions in the chat, and I will relay them to our speakers, time permitting. We have, of course, reached a point in time when the number of Jews who experienced persecution during the Nazi era is rapidly dwindling. And all too soon, there will be no more opportunities to learn their stories. So I'm very grateful to Ben Parket and his daughter-in-law, Alexa Morris, who both live here in the Bay Area, for sharing Ben's story in their new book. There is, of course, no money in this, trust me. The satisfaction is in sharing the story and hoping people will learn from it. And there is indeed much that is very important to learn from Ben's story. So thank you so much for being with us, Ben and Alexa. And Alexa, I am now going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Howard, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to the San Francisco Jewish Community Library for having us here today. And thanks to everyone who's joined us this evening. I also want to introduce my co-author, Benjamin Parket. He is several miles away from me in the comfort of his own house with his wife and my wife, his daughter, sitting there with him. I'm going to do most of the talking tonight, but Ben will, of course, jump in whenever he wants, and we'll answer questions later. So, briefly, before we get into the story of the courtyard, I want to tell you a little bit about how I know Ben. He's my father-in-law, as I said, and here is a photo of us earlier this year, just before the courtyard came out. We're in Yosemite, and in the background is the Half Dome. And here is a photo from, I think, around 2002. And we are on top of the Half Dome, right before you make the last climb to the very tippy top. And I might look like I'm laughing, but I will tell you that I am absolutely terrified, and I'm trying to keep it together because I'm really afraid of heights. Now, we were also with Karen and her brother, who were far braver than me, and they continued on to the very top. But Ben, who is not at all afraid of heights, he stayed with me because he didn't want me to be alone, especially because I was scared. And that's the kind of man that Ben is, and I'm very lucky to call him my father-in-law. And here's a picture of us I think we're starting out, and I don't know what terror awaits me, but that is me on the left, and then Karen in the middle, and Ben on the right. So now I'll tell you a bit about what the courtyard is about. In the heart of Nazi-occupied Paris, one Jewish family is hidden and protected by their courtyard neighbors for over 2 years. There's a lot more to the story, of course, but that's the gist of it. And it might sound straightforward, but it still took over 10 years to write. And over the time that I was working with Ben, writing the book and thinking about his story, this one question just kept popping into my mind. What would you do for your neighbors? And I think that for me, that is also what the story is about. So I would like you to keep that question in mind as well. And why did Ben want to tell his story? Well, one reason is that it's important to remember these stories because otherwise history has a tendency to repeat itself, which feels particularly resonant these days. Additionally, Ben wanted a record of what he went through for his family as a part of his legacy. He wants people to know the story of the courtyard. And so while we aren't going to tell you everything that's in the book, we are going to tell you the overall story of the courtyard this evening. So Ben was born in 1933 in Paris. He was the only member of his family born in France because his parents and his two older brothers immigrated from Warsaw, Poland before he was born. 1933 was also the same year that Hitler came to power in Germany, so change was already afoot. And by the time Ben was born, the Nazi Party was the only party legally permitted to exist in Germany. However, at this time, it had no impact on life in France. The family lived in the 11th arrondissement, which is the area that's colored right there. That was not the main Jewish district. That was the Marais, the 3rd and 4th districts or arrondissements. But there were still a number of other Jewish families from Warsaw in their neighborhood. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about the Parket family. They were very proudly Jewish, but they were not particularly observant. This is a photo of Joseph Yosel. He was a varnisher, and he specialized in the French polishing method. His wife was Rikla, and here she is with a young Ben, and they're at the park. Rikla and Joseph grew up in the same area of Warsaw, and they were matched by a matchmaker and married, and it was a good match. Here is a photo of, this is Severin. Sevik was his Polish name, and then Henrik on the right, or Henri was his French name, and Joseph. And Ben looking not super delighted to be there at the park. His older brothers were 8 and 7 years older than Ben, so he was really the baby of the family. And here is the very first photo of them all taken together. And it was taken in 1942, just after the requirement to wear the yellow badge was implemented. And I have a quick side story about this particular photo. This photo is displayed on the wall of the Memorial de la Shoah in Paris, and it's a part of their archives. Well, there's a very good television show called Un Village Français, a French village. Pardon my French, by the way. I don't speak French, but about a fictional French town during World War II. And it's an excellent show, and I highly recommend it. During the pandemic, when we were all stuck at home and binging TV shows, Ben and his wife started watching the show. And during season 4, the first episode of season 4, one of the characters pulls this very photo out of a desk drawer, and the camera lingers on it for some time. And Ben and his wife were watching the show at home, and they were completely unaware that this was going to happen. And can you imagine how that would feel? I think that would be a very, very surprising thing. Anyway, going back to Paris. The family lived in the 11th arrondissement in Paris, as I said, and that was the woodworking district. Number 5, Rue de Charonne is their address, and it is a short stroll from the Bastille, where the famous prison once stood. From the street, you walk through a gate, and then through a tunnel, and you emerge into a large courtyard. And this is the courtyard, which you can see is a pretty big courtyard. So in the 1930s and 40s, this courtyard was filled with carpenters, painters, varnishers like Joseph, all working, sometimes outside. There might be a horse and carriage with lumber or men moving furniture. There was an Italian painter who would work outside, if weather permitting, singing opera while he painted furniture, the sounds of Puccini bouncing off the courtyard walls. There was a busker in the neighborhood, an accordion player, who would come into the courtyard and play music while the shop owners and residents tossed coins out the window in payment. So I hope that gives you a picture. It was a very vibrant place. This is a drawing of the courtyard that Ben made, and it shows the 13 stairways or entrances that went around the courtyard. Now, Ben and his family lived at stairway number 1, and this is the street, and this is the entrance. Joseph, his father, had a workshop at stairway number 9. And while this wasn't important to Ben when he was very young, stairway number 6 is where the warehouse was the whole family would hide during Nazi occupation. So as you saw, it's a large courtyard, and most of the units were workshops and storefronts and offices. But stairway number one, where Ben lived with his family, was entirely residential. This is where the concierge lived, Monsieur and Madame Raymond, with their two adult children. Also, the Maiers, who owned a charcuterie or deli that was on the street, Rue de Charonne, and also had a back entrance from the courtyard. The Reginaults, another family, lived there too, and they owned the épicerie or grocery store that was next to the charcuterie. And finally, there was Madame Nicolas, a young widow who worked at the central police station. And there were a number of other residents of stairway number one, but these particular neighbors would prove very important to the Parket family. And for Ben, the courtyard was a wonderful place to live. The only other child there was a girl his age, Titi, and they were best friends. They walked to school each day, parting at the door of their grammar schools, which were gender segregated, as was typical of the time. And this is a photo of them dressed up for a kindergarten play. After school, they played hide and seek or soccer in the courtyard with other kids in the neighborhood. And when he wasn't playing with Titi, Ben loved to watch his father at work in his workshop, which, as I mentioned, was up stairway number 9 in the same courtyard. And every Wednesday, Ben and his father would go see the movies, just the two of them. Cowboy films were their favorite. And all in all, the courtyard was a pretty magical place for young Ben. Then, in September of 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France went to war because of a pact they had made with Poland, but in France, this period of relative quiet was known as the phony war, sort of the fake war. There were air raid drills, and food was rationed, so there were ration coupons, but compared to Poland, where things were very, very bad, and as you might remember where the extended Parket family was, it was not that bad in France. But in May of 1940, the real war began. Germans invaded France, France surrendered, and the country was divided into two parts. The north, which was ruled by Germany, and the south, which was now called Vichy France. And the city of Paris was now officially under German rule. So things were quiet for a bit, but in August of 1941, it got scary for the Parket family. French police, working in cooperation with German military police, arrested over 3,000 Jewish men and took them in buses outside of the city to what would become the Drancy camp. It was a huge, unfinished, U-shaped apartment complex. There was no plumbing, no electricity, and no furniture, and there was no communication with the outside world. And for the first 3 days, there was no food. So there Joseph, along with many others, became very ill. He began to waste away, and he even traded his pocket watch, which was a beloved present from his own father, for a bit of bread. And back at 5 Rue de Charonne, in the courtyard, the family worried, but they had no news. Rikla went to Drancy with a care package, but she wasn't allowed to deliver it or see him, and so they just waited. And then, in what was an incredible stroke of luck, the Nazi officer in charge of the camp left for 2 days in November of 1941. And in his absence, the doctor in charge decided to release 800 men who were very, very ill. And this was the only time during the entire war that this happened. And Joseph was one of those men who was released, and he came back home. So he had no connections, and he was not wealthy, but he was lucky here, and this saved his life. So Joseph came home, but he was very, very sick and very thin, but gradually he recovered. In the several months that he'd been gone, Jews had been forced to give up their radios and their bicycles. And then, in June of 1942, the requirement to wear the yellow badge went into effect. And Joseph decided this was the right time to get a formal photo taken, the family's first one. Because although the badge was clearly intended to invoke shame, he was determined to wear it with pride, and they went down the street to a photography studio and they got this photo taken. And as I mentioned earlier, this photo now hangs on the wall in the Memorial de la Shoah. The Great Roundup, or the Veldiv Roundup, started on July 16th, 1942. The day before the roundup, their upstairs neighbor, Madame Nicolas, rushed home during her lunch break and knocked at the Parket door. This was unusual because while they were friendly with Madame Nicolas, they weren't really friends. They were neighbors. But she came into their apartment and she warned them. She'd seen the Parket and family names on a list at the police station, and they were going to be arrested the next day. She told them they needed to make sure they weren't home when the police came. So this might sound simple. This might sound like a simple thing that she did, but if anybody had found out that she'd warned them, she would have been labeled as a traitor. She would have been jailed or maybe even executed. So make no mistake, it was an incredibly brave thing that she did. But where were they to go? First, they went to Joseph's workshop and hid there, but that was a short-term solution because eventually the police would figure out where Joseph's workshop was. So, with the concierge, Madame Ramon's help, they moved. One of Joseph's clients was a man named Thibault, who made and sold furniture, and he had a store and a warehouse in that courtyard. And he agreed to let the family move into the warehouse. They would have it as their home, and Joseph could varnish furniture there, which would give the family money to buy food. And this is a painting of the warehouse as it looked when the Parket family lived there. Ben's older brother, Henri, painted this after the war. So here is a mattress. There were two twin mattresses next to each other. There was a very low table and one stool. There was a wood stove, a chair, and a box that had their food in it. And they could hang the laundry here, a wardrobe with a chamber pot peeking out behind it. This was the door to Stairway 6, and this is Joseph's table where he could refinish furniture. So now they had housing in the warehouse, but how would they get food? Well, once a month, a man came from the country and he brought them a cured ham, which hung from the ceiling. And that same man gave them black market ration coupons, which were necessary to buy food in the shops. The buying of the food, well, that became Ben's job. Because he was youngest, it was safest for him to go out and about. So each day he went out with a milk pitcher and a bag, and he first went into the Meyer's charcuterie, where they had a package waiting for him. And then he went into the Reginald's épicerie, where they had a package for him. And these neighbors made sure to keep something aside so that the Parket family would be able to eat. So the family settled into the warehouse, and for Ben, that meant a lot of days staring out the window. During the day, Joseph and Henri refinished furniture in the warehouse, and Severin actually worked at an upholsterer's in the same courtyard, a job that the Raymonds got him. Ricla was doing the cooking and the laundry, etc., but Ben, who was 9 years old, he didn't have much to do aside from getting the food, which was his favorite part of the day. There was no school. There was no playing with friends, no playing with Titi. So to keep him occupied, Joseph taught Ben how to varnish wood, and Ben would take any wood scraps that weren't going to be used, and he would finish them, and he would tap his initial B into them. He also spent hours and hours staring at a drawing in a book, the only book he had, so long that he can still recreate it, and he did for me. But mostly the days were long and they were slow. But however slow the days were, the nights were way worse, because then they had to be completely silent. The warehouse was supposed to be empty, and once the day workers left, that part of the courtyard was quiet. So the family had to be very quiet at night. No light, no smoke from a chimney, even in winter, and no sound at all. However, even though they were in hiding, they were not entirely isolated. As I mentioned, during the day, there was a lot of activity in the courtyard, and this activity provided a kind of cover, the way it's easier to hide in a crowd. Every day, a colleague of Joseph's named Monsieur Roger would stop by the warehouse on his way home with the newspaper, and the Parket family would have a glass of wine waiting for him. Wine was strictly rationed, and the family didn't actually drink wine, but Ben would purchase it from the merchant across the street just for Monsieur Roger. And Monsieur Roger would update them on what was going on outside in the world while he had his glass of wine. And on New Year's Eve, because they thought the Germans would be so busy celebrating that they'd be distracted, Monsieur Roger and his wife actually took Ben to see a movie. Oh. Another time, a Hungarian couple took Ben for a picnic on the Marne River. And then in the spring of 1944, a Hungarian Jewish family, the Kreismans, went into hiding across the hall. And on Sundays, Mr. Kreisman would visit and teach Severin to play chess. So there were moments of humanity and escape even during this time. Which was good, because the reality is that the family lived under the constant threat of discovery or betrayal. Once a Nazi officer drove his Mercedes into the courtyard and then stood around looking up at the courtyard windows. Joseph watched him out through the warehouse window and tried to figure out what to do. Should they flee? Should they hide? It turned out that the Nazi was there to see the courtyard mechanic about his car, but you can imagine how terrifying that must have been. There was also a worker in the courtyard who joined the French militia for extra money, and he found out about the Parkets and he wanted to turn them in for the financial reward, but the concierge threatened him and he stayed silent. And perhaps most terrifying for Ben, one night the stress finally got to Joseph and he had a panic attack. In the middle of the night, the family awoke to Joseph thrashing around the room, shouting, which was, of course, very scary because that would bring unwanted attention, and it took a long time to calm him down. But they did, and luckily, nobody heard. So, in this way, with long days and even longer nights, vacillating largely between boredom and terror, 2 years passed, and Ben was almost 11 years old. Until finally, in August of 1944, Madame Raymond knocked on their door and told them it was safe. Paris had been liberated and the Parkets could move back into their old apartment in stairway number 1. So they came outside where everyone was celebrating. And while Ben doesn't remember exactly what it felt like to emerge into the courtyard with the entire family, he does have a very strong, vivid memory of right afterwards seeing all of the women, his mother included, sitting together crying with happiness. When the Parkets went back to their old apartment in stairway number 1, everything was gone, all their remaining furniture. The wood stove had been ripped from the wall. Even the linoleum had been scraped up. But they were safe and they were together. They were alive because Madame Nicolas had warned them, because Monsieur Thibault had given them a place to hide. They were alive because the Maiers and the Reginots had kept food aside for them, and because the Raymonds, the concierges, had threatened the tradesmen who wanted to turn them in and kept him from doing so. So they were alive and they were safe because of their neighbors. In the days following liberation, Joseph and the boys went out walking in Paris, exploring. They went to the Jardin des Plantes, which is where the American soldiers had their camp. And there they met Private Sidney Feldman, a young Jewish soldier from New York. He became a good friend of the Parkets, and he spent many evenings at their apartment, enjoying Rickla's home-cooked meals. He even took Ben to the American commissary, where he fed him platters of donuts and introduced him to bottles of Coca-Cola. After a month or two, Private Feldman left Paris with his squadron to fight in what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. But the family continued to keep in touch through letters. So now that they'd rejoined the world, Ben went back to school and caught up on what he'd missed. They also resumed their annual beach vacation, and here is a photo of the Parket family with Madame Raymond and her daughter Paulette. Henri was taking the photo, so he's not in it. They're posing on a diffused naval mine, and mines like this dotted the entire coastline after the war. But even as the family tried to move on, they were surrounded by the ghosts of their former neighbors and friends because the Jewish community had been gutted, and many of their friends never returned from the camps. And because Vichy France had collaborated with the Nazi, France didn't feel the same. Joseph and Rikla had loved France before the war, but now it was tarnished. So, after Israel was established in 1948, they, like many of their Jewish friends, started talking about immigrating. I clicked too far, but they went to Israel in 1949. As Jewish immigrants from that time did, the family first lived in a refugee camp, and then they received housing. They had to learn Hebrew, and they received Jewish names. The older brothers served their compulsory military duty while Ben finished high school, and then he also served in the military. And then, as the rest of the family settled into life in Israel, Ben applied to the College of San Mateo, which was free to international students. So in 1957, he went via boat to the US on a student visa. And on the way to California, he first stopped in New York City, where he was reunited with Sidney Feldman, who was now a police officer. Then he boarded his flight to California, and the flight had a pit stop in Detroit, where the Kreismans, who you might remember was the Jewish family that was in hiding across the hall from the Parkets, had moved. They came to the airport to give him a hug and a sandwich before he got back on the plane. And then he arrived in California and started attending the College of San Mateo. And after a couple of years, transferred to Stanford University. He met his wife at a birthday party, proposed after 4 dates, his future wife, I should say, and then graduated with a degree in architecture, married, had 3 children. And with the exception of a short stint back in Israel for a work project, that is where he and Ora have stayed. Of course, over the years, Ben has returned to the Courtyard many, many times, and gradually all of the people he knew left. You can see right here, this is a picture of the Courtyard over the years, sort of same angle as it changes. I was with him in 2016 when we visited, and the concierge at the time introduced Ben to Patrick, who currently leases Ben's old apartment. And Patrick was excited to let us in and have us explore the apartment. And this is a photo of Ben sitting in his apartment window. We were also able to get back into the warehouse where the Parket family hid, although it is unrecognizable now because it's been converted to an apartment. And here is a picture of our family. On the right is Ben with his youngest grandchild, Max, who is 10 years old in this photo, the same age that Ben was when he was in hiding. And the photo on the left was taken at the book launch celebration for the Courtyard. The entire family was there. And so were over 100 members of our local community. And it was a marvelous celebration. And I have to say, and I really mean this, that every time I look at this photo, I feel the same feeling that I felt that day, which is a sense of gratitude to the people, the neighbors who protected the Parket family. Because if they hadn't risked their own lives, my family would not exist. And most of the people in this photo would not exist. And they do. And they do because a small group of people, not close friends, not family, but neighbors, chose to do the right thing. And I am profoundly grateful to them. And I hope that someday, if that same question lands at my own door, that I will choose to do the right thing. And I hope if it comes to that, that we all will. And speaking of doing the right thing, there is one more thing that we are hoping to do, and that is we are hoping to get the neighbors that saved Ben and his family recognized as righteous among the nations, which is, of course, the honorific used to honor those who risked their own lives to protect Jews from being murdered by the Nazis. Because Ben was a child when he knew them, he only knew their last names. So tracking them down and confirming their identities has been very challenging, but we are working on it. And if you or anyone you know might be able to help, then I would love to speak to you offline. And with that, thank you all very much for listening. And I will stop sharing once I figure out how to do that.
Thank you so much, Alexa, for a wonderful presentation. So folks are invited to put their questions in the chat, and they can be for Alexa, or they can also be for Ben, who is here. So I invite you to share your questions. Maybe I will begin with a question of what this can be for you, Alexa, or for you, Ben. What prompted you to embark on writing a book, especially at this point?
You're mute. You guys are still muted if you want to jump in.
Okay. Quite a few years back, I decided it's about time, like Alexa mentioned too, that we should let the world forget what happened, especially in today's atmosphere. And secondly, it's for my family to know. They should know what I went through, and keep it in mind for their life. And also, I was going to do it because I wanted to express my gratitude to those neighbors that saved us.
Have you had the opportunity to find any of the either descendants of those neighbors who might be around today?
Unfortunately, so far, no.
Okay.
We have some leads, I will say. We've been connected with some archives in France, and they are helping us to maybe track down some people, but we're not confirmed yet.
Well, the kids.
Anybody? Yeah.
Okay. Harriet, Michael has a question. Harriet, you can ask that.
Well, most of the time when I've heard about people who saved Jewish people, there was some reason. So anybody known, did you have any idea why they did what they did? Because they put themselves in danger when they did that. And my personal thing is I have a second cousin who survived from Warsaw by being taken in by a Catholic family. But it seems like, what was the reason? And I'm trying to think of the man that, I'll think of the guy's name who wrote the book about the rarity of the people who actually went out on the limb and saved Jews out of all the millions and millions of people. What was their reason? And he had reasons that they took chances and they had a high moral right. You know who I'm talking to about, and that they had each of them had one parent who was very, very not religious, but very, very moral. And so these people had, this was a combination about how they did it. So he was really lucky that these people had this inner strength that they did that.
Answering your question, I think we were part of that rarity that you mentioned. There was no reason for the owner of the épicerie or the charcuterie or Madame Raymond to help us out. They knew that they were sacrificing. They were in danger of, if they were caught, they were in danger of being caught. Nevertheless, they did it. And I cannot think of any reason. There was no benefit whatsoever, except their feeling in their heart.
Good people.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little about the process that you of writing the book and how it was to revisit these memories and sort of and to make them vivid and especially the two of you working together. Can you maybe discuss that process a bit?
The book was written actually by Alexa, and I'm very thankful to her for the beautiful job that she did. Taking all she had from me was my memories and my feelings, and she translated it into a book. And the book was written in such a beautiful way. I'm impressed, for instance, it was written small chapters, which makes it really easier to read, very small chapters. And in each chapter touch on an aspect of what happened in the courtyard or what happened to us. And that information, she got it from me, obviously, but she presented it in a beautiful way.
And I'll just add, I was so impressed by how much Ben remembered and the detail. I mean, as I said, this took over 10 years of us working together. And so it was a lot of interviewing and then me asking questions. But I think Ben had started thinking about this and had told the story and a number of times, really remembered so much more than I could have expected. And I'm grateful for that.
I'm curious about the responses to the book, and also including within your own family, if the story has sort of been owned in a different way because it is in the book form rather than in the sort of haphazard way in which so many of our memories get relayed in families.
Some of the members of the family have already read it, obviously. The latest guy that did read it was my grandson, the 11-year-old grandson, just finished reading his book. And not only did he read the book, he presented as a book review for his class. He made a talk, book talk in his class, and he gave me a video of that report that he did for his class.
That's lovely.
Mhm.
So does anybody else have any in the audience have any questions for Alexa or for Ben? If so, please put them in the chat, or you can also I can ask you to Evie, if you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah. I made a comment in the thread. Where was it? About wondering what was the impulse to make numerous visits to go back and revisit the courtyard. Because my parents, I hear that and I'm sort of startled because my family members would never do that. It was me that did the explorations. It was my oldest brother who put the Stolpersteine, as they do in Germany and Austria, in front of their doors. Well, anyway, yeah, I had, because I've written about it, I had some researchers call me um, who lived, non-Jews, who lived in the neighborhood, one of whom moved in to my mother's building after it was Judenfrei. Um, I freaked out. I asked him to describe, if he could, every single crack in the door or the this or the that. But I'm curious as to, over the years, what was the first visit you took? Were the visits different from one another? I'm just, in awe of your bravery in revisiting those traumas.
I didn't feel any problem of bravery. I was already grown up when I
Well, yeah.
visited.
Mhm.
Uh, it was like my home, I saw it like my home where I grew up. I played and had neighbors, and um, as Alexa mentioned, the apartment where we lived is now owned by Miss Patrick Delobel, and when we visited him, he took us to the apartment, and then when we told him the story, he put that in his pocket and he said, "Here's the key. You can come and live here while we visit Paris."
Oh my. So
Obviously,
what what
we didn't stay in there because we already had hotel rooms, and we already said.
yeah, yeah. How many times did you over the years revisit visit the courtyard?
Offhand, I would say about 5, 6 times.
Uh-huh.
And I've revisited with Alexa, with
Ah,
my daughter, and revisited with my grandson. And I showed him there's a little faucet in the courtyard, which I used to play with it, and I used to get in trouble with that. So what he did, he took a picture of himself with that faucet.
oh my gosh. That is so beautiful. When was your first
So
visit?
well, we need to go
Oh,
to some other questions, Evie, but
okay.
thank you though.
Sorry. Wow.
So thank you.
Thank you.
So we had a question from Bess, which is asking, did Ben, did you talk about your experiences readily over the years, or did this start more recently?
More recently.
Mhm.
Yeah, you go through life, even when we went to Israel and my parents we never talked about it. We had a life to pursue and we had a future to build. And it was not the subject of discussion, or we didn't talk about it. It's only recently, first of all, after I retired, I had time to think about it. But otherwise, no, we didn't dwell on it.
Um, so we have a question from Susan asking whether you ever found your childhood friend.
TT?
Yeah.
No way. TT is only this little girl with the white dress. No, no, I didn't. Yeah, no, I didn't. None of them.
Harriet asks whether you've ever spoken with any schools about your story, and if you would consider doing so.
I talked, that we have an organization here locally, which is called Hidden Children. It's an international organization of all the children that were in hiding during the war. And I did make a presentation to the hidden children. I made another presentation.
At the schools you did
Dylan's
for a
school.
while. Yeah.
Yeah,
you did.
that's right. At the schools, I did make a presentation of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A few years
And-
ago, not recently.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Deborah Glazer asks whether Ben, whether you wore the star when you went out for daily errands, and whether you were afraid of being picked up, if so.
The answer is no. That my mother took away and undid the stars, and I was the little guy that was running around in his neighborhood. They all knew me in the neighborhood, but no stars. No.
And there's a question as to whether the entire family ended up coming to the United States.
No, I'm the only one of the five of us. They stayed on in Israel. I came here only as a student, with the intention actually of going back to Israel and after I become an architect and practice in Israel, which I did later on, a few years later. However, luck was that I met my wife Ora. She had arrived here a year before I did with her parents, and the rest is beautiful history.
Well, this has been wonderful. I want to thank you, Ben. Thank you, Alexa. Thanks for your whole family, for other family members being here. Um, and um, and thank you for writing this book, because this is how these stories reach people that you'll never have the opportunity to meet yourself, but they'll know you through this story, and it's very important and it's very valuable. So
Thank you, Howard. Thank you,
you.
Howard, for having us, and thank you all those people that listened and give me posed all these questions. I'm have a nice have a nice holiday. There's a holiday coming up.
yes, Sukkot starts tomorrow night. Um, and is there anything, Alexa or Ben, is there anything that you would like to leave us with?
I don't think I have anything else.
Personally, no.
Okay.
Just a story that you know what happened.
But thank you.
So thanks everybody for joining us, and thank you so much, and we really appreciated this time with you. And Alexa, thanks for all the work you put into this presentation, which was also quite beautiful.
Thank you.
So thanks everybody, and have a good holiday for those who celebrate, and keep on reading, keep on learning from these stories, because as Alexa said, this is really important that we think about how, when push comes to shove, how we do act in the world. Thanks very much, and be well. Bye-bye.
Chag Sameach.
Sameach.